Here's a very detailed model plan to a question about the role of women in Germany in the years 1933 to 45. I've deliberately made this very detailed because it's an area that's not very well covered in the textbook, and certainly the examination board are strongly suggesting there's going to be an increased emphasis on this topic, particularly the role of women in World War II, which is the final paragraph of this plan. But this plan will pretty much cover every conceivable question that could come up on women, so it's really important that you spend the time to learn it in detail. Okay, so the question is, in what ways did the Nazis make use of German women in the years 1933 to 45? There have been questions in the past about up to 1939, but I've deliberately extended this one to 1945 because of the change I just talked about. Okay, so the usual, just to highlight the key points, but I think you're used to this now. In terms of the essentials, it's the introduction, the conclusion and the opening sentence, and then in the amount of time you have available, expand each of those opening sentences with the detail in the right hand column, and I put the key facts in bold to try to focus you on those. I'll take you through those now. Okay, so we just zoom in. The introduction, the opening paragraph, the Nazi view of women was that their role was to create as many healthy babies for Germany as possible who would grow up to be future soldiers, workers and mothers. Single sentence, that will do it. Just make that point, okay? Babies for Germany. They were effectively fighting the battle for births. Future soldiers who would make the German army strong so that Hitler could expand eastwards and get living space. That's the key point there. Your first proper paragraph then, focus on, very clearly state what Hitler's aims were for women. Now I've hopefully succinctly put here three main aims. Okay, so have a look. A, for women to leave employment so they could concentrate on their domestic role of having children. Okay, get out of jobs, get married and have children. Secondly, to get married and have as many children as possible. And thirdly, to ensure that the children they had were strong Aryans and were fit, hereditarily healthy. Come back to that one in a minute. So that's your first proper paragraph, which will be paragraph 2. The third paragraph, focus on the early years. Now, when we say the early years, we mean the first 4 years, which is 1933 to 36. The key policy then was to get women out of the workplace to free up jobs for men. That's the point you want to make in that particular paragraph. So, how to develop that? Okay, so you can start off by saying in the Weimar Republic, women did take up jobs. Okay, they were very liberated, much more so than in other countries like Britain and even America. So, for example, 10% of members of Parliament were women in Germany, which is way ahead of Britain at the time. Then, of course, Hitler came to power in 1933. Now, the key things to mention are the marriage loan scheme, which gave a loan of 1,000 marks to women who left their jobs, who created jobs for unemployed men. That was part of a law called the Law for the Encouragement of Marriage. Excuse me. That was passed very early on in June 1933. The NSF, the National Socialist Frauenschaft, but just say the NSF, learn that, was the Nazi women's organisation that trained women in domestic skills. About 6,000 women belonged to it. It was led by a woman, Gertrude Scholz-Klink. A bit of a mouthful that, but if you can learn that name, that will impress the examiners. It's certainly not mentioned in the textbooks. Okay, so that's that paragraph. Then move on to paragraph 4. Now what you're doing here is you're focusing in on a parallel policy that was throughout the Hitler's power was to ensure that children were strong Aryans. So it's not just the number of children, it's the quality of children. So lots and lots of children, quantity and quality. A quarter of the marriage loan was cancelled for every child that was born. The Motherhood Cross, we all know about that, bronze, silver and gold medals. So they were about encouraging lots of children to be born. And then I put information about the quality. Now, that's a bit of a mouthful, that law, but if you can learn it, that's a good one. It created the genetic health courts. It basically says we want to prevent Germany having hereditarily diseased children. So children, women and men could be sterilised by that law. 10 Commandments for the choice of a spouse gave guidance on how to choose a healthy Aryan husband. And of course the Nuremberg laws, you learnt that in Jewish policy, forbade German women from marrying Jews, so mention that. And you could also mention the Lebensborn programme, or Spring of Life, whereby, particularly during the war, healthy Aryan women and older girls were selected to have children with SS soldiers. Your next paragraph, paragraph 5, focuses in on the period 1936 to 39. So this is before the outbreak of war, but it was about 4 years in, after Hitler took power. There was a U-turn, an about-turn in employment policy. The reason for this, in 1935, conscription for men was introduced, and as a result there was a shortage of workers because men were leaving their jobs to go and join the army. And so from 1936 onwards, women were increasingly taken out of the home in order to fill the jobs vacated by men. Now, the final area, which is the new area, which will perhaps be new to you, but it's important you do know this, is what were the policies towards women during World War II. So we'll just look at this sentence by sentence. Hitler at first was reluctant to introduce conscription for women. He didn't believe it was natural. He still clung on to the idea that women should work, women should be in the home, their main role. However, the employment of women did increase in the early years of World War II in Germany. For example, by 1941, 14 million women were employed. That's because Hitler did introduce conscription of women in 1939, but it was mainly limited to young and unmarried women. On the whole, in the first few years of the war, when the war was going well for Germany, foreign labour from the occupied countries was brought back to Germany to fill the gaps in the workplace. So Hitler, on the whole, could keep many women in the home. But by 1943, the war was turning against Germany. The Russians were pushing Germany back from the east from 1933, and of course in 1944, the D-Day landings, the Americans were pushing from the west. So what happened in February 1943, Goebbels called for total war. And from that point on, women were required to give a lot more for the war effort. So I've included some facts there. Conscription for all women, including married, was introduced up to the age of 50. Working hours were extended to 48 hours per week. And much of the work they were conscripted into was tough labour. Defensive fortifications were built in the east, called the East Wall, and the West Wall in the west. So those are the key points for that paragraph. Bring it together with a conclusion. Key thing is throughout the period 33 to 45, policies changed. The ideal when Hitler came to power was to be at home making babies, but as war approached, they were increasingly put back into the workforce. But in the early years of the war, Hitler was reluctant to put too many demands on women. But after 1943, with the call for total war, that very much changed. That hopefully will be really useful for you if a question comes up on women this year.